Not as much. Thank you. Right. Good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, colleagues, and friends. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to those listening and watching online. My name is Mucham Semwa. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, and I shall be chairing the proceedings this morning. Today we gather with heavy hearts, yet grateful spirits, to honor the extraordinary life and enduring legacy of Professor Edward, commonly known as Eddie Webster, a true pillar in both academia and society. As we come together in this solemn occasion, we are reminded of the profound impact that Professor Webster had, not only within the hallowed halls of academia, but also in the broader fabric of our society. On behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, who could not make it, Professor Zeblon Vilakazi, and the university at large, we extend our deepest condolences to the Webster family. Eddie Webster was more than just a university professor. He was a guiding light, a beacon of wisdom and compassion, whose influence went beyond the lecture room. His commitment to scholarship was matched only by his unwavering dedication to social justice, equality, and the empowerment of marginalized communities and the people that live within them. Throughout his illustrious career, Professor Webster blazed trails in the field of sociology, challenging conventional and received wisdom, and inspiring countless others to pursue knowledge with passion and purpose. His groundbreaking research shed light on the complexities of our social fabric, uncovering hidden truths and giving voice to the voiceless. But Eddie's impact extended far beyond the realm of academia. He was a tireless advocate for change, a champion for the downtrodden, and a steadfast ally to those in need. Whether fighting against apartheid or advocating for workers' rights, he never wavered in his commitment to justice and equality for all. Yet, amidst his many achievements and accolades, Eddie remained humble, always putting the needs of others before his own. He was truly a mentor, a friend, a confidant to countless students and colleagues, many of whom are among us today, always offering guidance, but did so, allow me to say again, with humility, support, and encouragement whenever it was needed most. As we gather here today to remember Eddie, let us not mourn his passing as such, but celebrate the remarkable life he lived and the profound impact he had on all who knew him. Let us honor his memory by continuing the work he was so passionate about, by standing up for what is right, and by striving to make our world a better, more just place for all. This university, and indeed the many people he wholeheartedly worked with and for, with distinction, will be the poorer without Eddie. Though Eddie may no longer walk among us, his legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of those he touched and the countless lives he changed for the better. Let us carry forward his spirit of compassion, his commitment to justice, and his unwavering belief in the power of education to transform lives and uplift communities. Before we go into our program, there are a few things that I just want to remind you about. So, as I'm sure you've all seen, there are ushers who are assisting those in need of assistance. It is those people wearing reflective jackets in that color. I'm colorblind, I can't quite see it from here, but you see them with those jackets. I'm sure you each grabbed a bottle of water as you went in. If you didn't, please feel free to do so right at the entrance there. I also want to say to you that there is a condolence book at the entrance of the Great Hall, and you're all invited to sign it, to say whatever you wish to say, and this book will be handed over to the Webster family after the proceedings. I also want to remind our speakers, we have graciously accepted our invitation to say some words about Eddie, to please keep to time. Time is not on our side. I now want to get to the second item of our agenda today. And I would like to read a message from the President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency, Honorable Cyril Ramaphosa. Tribute to Professor Eddie Webster. I was deeply saddened to learn of the passing of Eddie Webster, a friend and comrade and an outstanding compatriot and academic. My sincere condolences go to Luli Kalinokos, the children Kimon, Alexia, Helen, and Talia, and their 7 grandchildren. We have together lost a friend, a father, a friend, activist, intellectual, guide, and mentor. I was privileged to witness the critical role that Eddie Webster played in supporting the rise of trade unions from the 1970s through to the present. He was always thinking about how to strengthen the bargaining power and protect the interests of the most vulnerable sectors of our society. Eddie demonstrated a lifelong commitment to promoting workers' education, from which many workers and trade union members have benefited. I came to appreciate in particular his contribution to worker safety in the mining industry, among others. His academic research attracted global renown. He advanced our understanding of the workplace and workers' power to influence decisions in the workplace. He understood only too well the wider links between trade unionism and the fight against apartheid. Both Eddie and Luli were deeply involved in the struggle against racism, oppression, and exploitation in our country. Eddie always remained true to his ideas. He was a deeply humble, self-effacing person, accessible to everyone, and never sought office or status as a result of his achievements. Throughout his life, he remained committed to the ideas of radical reform and the possibility for workers to shape the transition of South Africa. To Luli and your family, please know that the nation is mourning with you. You can take comfort in the enormous legacy that Eddie leaves behind. Ambakahle Eddie, Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa. I now move to item 3, and wish here to introduce a pre-recorded message from the Wits Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Zeblon Vilakazi. And the message will be played.
Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Dr. Bladen Zemande, colleagues and other esteemed guests, Professor Eddie Webster's family and friends, ladies and gentlemen. Today we gather to pay tribute to the life and legacy of Professor Eddie Webster, a son and stalwart of this university for decades. Not only do we mourn the loss of an esteemed colleague who was a remarkable human being, but also celebrate the embodiment of the qualities we strive to instill in our graduates. Professor Webster was not just a colleague or a mentor to many, but he was a guiding light whose legacy will continue to inspire generations to come. Professor Webster's dedication to scholarship was matched only by his unwavering commitment to the principles of empathy and justice. Throughout his nearly 5 decades at Wits, he exemplified the qualities of a principled leader, always guided by a moral compass and steered towards the pursuit of evidence-based truth. His academic output was nothing but prodigious. In the words of an internationally renowned sociologist, Professor Michael Burawoy, Professor Webster's work was something akin to a windmill. In actual fact, he alludes to the concept of a perpetual motion machine that ceaselessly generates insights and pushes the boundaries of knowledge. His contribution to the field of sociology, particularly in the development of sociology of the South, have left an incredible mark on the discipline. Professor Webster's leadership was unparalleled. Throughout his vision and dedication, he established and led the Sociology of Work program, SWAP, subsequently Institute, which spearheaded global studies on labor and trade unionism. More recently, in his post-retirement years, he was pivotal in the establishment of the Southern Center for Inequality Studies. This underscores his contribution, or rather his commitment, to pursuing the frontiers and pushing the boundaries of knowledge and engaging with the pressing issues of the day. In particular, in the case of the fast-evolving labor workplace in the advent of the new technologies that are with us today. But perhaps Professor Webster's most enduring legacy lies in his unwavering commitment to bridging the gap between our university and the wider society. His critical collaborative involvement in the investigation of workplace deaths in the mining industry and the subsequent creation of strategies for the involvement of safety standards stands as a testament to his dedication in making a tangible difference to those that are less fortunate. As we reflect on Professor Eddie Webster's life and legacy, let us not only mourn his passing, but also celebrate the incredible impact he has had on our institution and society at large, as reflected by the presence of many who are here to celebrate his life and legacy. His passion, energy, intellect, and unwavering commitment to the pursuit of truth and justice will continue to inspire as we strive to carry forward his vision. May his memory be a blessing to us all. I thank you.
Group 1, and these are our esteemed colleagues who are going to speak on behalf of Wits University. And we will start with you, Professor Imran Valodia, our Pro-Vice Chancellor for the portfolio of Climate Sustainability and Inequality. He's also the Director of the Southern Center for Inequality Studies, where Eddie, I'm sure, signed something for the last time. Professor Michelle Williams, Head of Department, Sociology, a long-standing colleague of Eddie, and Dr. Prishani Naidu, the Director of the Society, Work and Politics Institute, otherwise known as SWAP, also a long working colleague with Eddie. In that order, I call upon each one of you to say your remarks.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I think Eddie, Professor Webster, left lots and lots for us to think about. The one thing I want to reflect on in the remarks that I'm going to make is the kind of example that he left for us around the kind of question of the relationship between the work that we do at the university here and and the real world of kind of struggles outside of the university. And I've been asking myself the question, what would Eddie say about that? And I think being Eddie, he would have wanted us to start with kind of thinking about what Marx himself had said about this question. And one of the ways that Karl Marx thought about this problem was through through his quote. Philosophers here have hitherto only interpreted the world in different ways. The point, however, is to change it. What do we think Marx meant by that? I think one kind of interpretation that one could take is to say that what we do here at the university has to go outside the university, and we have to kind of use outside to test the validity of the ideas that are generated here. And we have to test whether these ideas have in fact changed the world. I think Eddie would have found that a very one-dimensional kind of interpretation of Marx kind of on that quote. Because I think his insight was not to see the university as an institution where ideas kind of would be generated in the abstract, and that we would then take these into the real world. But I think he thought about quite a transformed university, where we would also kind of generate the ideas here, informed by what was happening in the real world. And I think his life's work really shows us that the kind of importance of thinking about that relationship in a really symbiotic way. Being Eddie, I think he would also have perhaps kind of informed us about a quote from CLR James, the kind of amazing Trinidadian kind of philosopher and Marxist historian. And what CLR kind of James had to say about this was, and I'm going to quote, kind of the problem of modern philosophy from Descartes in the 16th century kind of to Stalinism in the 1950s is the problem of the division of labor between the intellectuals and the workers. I think this might have been the kind of thing that Eddie would have said, because I think better than anyone else, he understood the importance of this relationship between kind of striving for a more equal world, kind of through trade unions, and I think he would have been extremely critical of an intellectual discourse of the university that kind of creates that division of labor. And his life's work of kind of promoting education for workers from his work in the IIE in the 1970s, kind of to the global labor university that we have now at Wits, is a key part of how he thought about it. So kind of moving on to closure and staying with CLR James, many of you who knew Eddie well would know he was he loved sport, and one way in which he could combine his kind of amazing productivity in the thinking world was having a huge set of interest in sport. I sort of know that his first love was rugby, but since I couldn't ever kind of understand the intricacies of rugby, he and I shared a real passion for cricket. And we would often escape the university when there was a test match at the Wanderers. And Eddie and I would sit at the Wanderers and and watch the cricket. And I'd enjoy the way he thought about the world. So CLR James was not only a famous historian, but also kind of wrote the most interesting books on the relationship between cricket and what happens in the real world. And I'm going to kind of ask you to allow me a slight kind of digression into the kind of intricacies of cricket, and a particular ball that is bowled in cricket, which is the googly. So what the kind of googly is a ball that is completely unorthodox. Mostly, someone who's spinning the ball is trying is trying to bring the ball into the batsman. What you do with the googly is to kind of outfox the batsman by getting the ball to move the other way. So the point about the googly is not just that it's unorthodox, but also that it takes a huge amount of skill to bowl the googly. What kind of C.L.R. James does in his book Beyond a Boundary is to use the metaphor of the googly to make the point that it's kind of only through being unorthodox and kind of through being innovative that it's possible to change the balance of power in society. So in closing, and kind of sticking with cricket, as kind of Eddie leaves us, I think it would be fair to say that he had a fantastic innings, that he always opened the bowling, and that he bowled some excellent googlies. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Am I speaking? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mucha and Imran. I wasn't sure where you were going with cricket, but I got it in the end. I don't know anything about cricket. I just want to say it's really wonderful to see so many people here from so far. I've seen people who are from Ghana, Kenya, Germany, across the country. Our Cape Tonians have returned to visit. The Eastern Cape, Kimberley, Pretoria, and of course, Gauteng in general, but Joburg. So it's really wonderful. Thank you for coming. So I'm the head of the sociology department, and I'm speaking on behalf of the department today, so I want to make that clear. And this was Eddie's academic home for over 45 years. And for us, I think the sociology was the thread that wove the many dimensions of Eddie's extraordinary life into a coherent whole. For Eddie, the conception of the role of the university, I think, best reflects his life's work. So Eddie's understanding of the university, we think we could define into three defining features. First, the university must be guided by ethical principles. It must use its location in society to take a stand against injustice, a moral force for good, and be guided by an ethics of caring for humanity, especially the oppressed, exploited, and victims from all forms of violence. For Eddie, this commitment to ethical principles of social justice must course through knowledge production, teaching, supervision, writing, and building democratic and socially relevant institutions. He held himself to the same standards and lived the life he valued. He was a man of enormous integrity, an activist scholar who was embedded in the social world while also always remaining independent. And I'm sure that upset a lot of his labor folk. He believed deeply in transformative non-racialism, and his own scholarship demonstrates concerns about social justice that remained central to him and he moved effortlessly across scales, from the local to the national, to the regional, to the continental, to the global, and hence people came from so far to be here. For Eddie, the point of the university was to make the world a better place through knowledge production and teaching the next generation, and he never shied away from taking a stand against injustice. The second feature, defining feature of the university that we think that represents Eddie, is the role of the university is to be engaged in the social issues of its times. It is not enough to simply do research delinked from the social world in whatever discipline or field. The university must see itself engaging the world. And for Eddie, this was reflected in his 50 years of dedication to labor, both formal and informal, in South Africa, Africa, and the world. Eddie was truly an internationalist, but it is also reflected in his extraordinary connections with students, His engaged and collaborative research projects that always went beyond the university gates to workplaces, communities in South Africa and beyond. And we all have very funny stories about these experiences, because many of us have enjoyed with him going into these very spaces. It is also reflected in his willingness to engage new ideas. He was always growing with the times. He loved engaging students, colleagues, workers, and friends would often ask very kind of probing questions about their ideas of social problems and what possible solutions we can have. For instance, he incorporated the importance of the climate crisis and the deep just transition. These were not things that he had originally taken seriously. And he used to think Jackie was just obsessed with climate, and then by the end, he himself was as well. But he also acknowledged and took into his own studies the deleterious effects of the digital world on formal and informal workers. Through building programs like the Global Labor University, what we affectionately call GLUE, he helped make university education available to workers. And by building institutions like SWAP, he made university research relevant to labor, social movements, and the government. Third, a university must be committed to the various publics, both internal and external. For Eddie, the academic public included colleagues, students, and the institution. So it is no surprise that he created the most vibrant and dynamic industrial sociology program perhaps in the world, teaching scores of students who went on to do extraordinary things. He built institutions beyond sociology within WITS, such as the GLUE program, SWAP, and the Southern Center for Inequality Studies. I don't know any other academic who's built such enduring institutions in one university. He helped build and revitalize networks such as the South African Labor Bulletin, the South African Sociological Association, the Global Labor Journal, the Labor Research Committee of the International Sociological Association, the Chris Hani Institute, and many, many more. He supervised close to 50 postgraduate students, taught tens of thousands of students, including hundreds and hundreds of unionists over his career. He also saw the university's public beyond academia. For Eddie, because of the historically important role of labor in fighting against injustice and building a democratic, non-racial, and just society, he dedicated much of his intellectual life to labor broadly conceived. For Eddie, commitment was also expressed in loyalty. Eddie was loyal to the cause of building a better world. He was loyal to labor, to students, to colleagues, to friends, to institutions, to WITS, and to his family. This is demonstrated in his lifelong friendships with so many people. Once you got to know Eddie, you were a friend, a colleague, a comrade for life, and he loved life. He was exuberant in all his ways. Perhaps most importantly, Eddie built bridges, listened to everyone, and found common ground. He never let any struggle or disagreement dehumanize him, and always remained committed to his values, the people around him, and the idea that academics and WITS University, like all South African universities, had a hugely important role to play in steering the world into a better future. Hundreds of messages are poured in from around the world, from scholars, activists, workers, unions, workers' organizations, colleagues, students, friends, and admirers. And we've put these, as many as we saw, we put them together in a little booklet that we will give to the family of all the tributes that have come through. So the world will never be the same without Eddie, but he would want us to continue fighting for the values that shaped his life, and in particular, a university that is ethical, engaged, and committed. Go well, our beloved Madala, our colleague, mentor, teacher, and friend.
Good morning, Luli and Alexia, who are joining us on the live stream, because Luli is ill today. Kimon, Michelle, Marcus, Nicholas, Sean, and members of the extended family, colleagues, friends, comrades. I speak on behalf of the Society Work and Politics Institute, SWOP, the intellectual home that Professor Eddie Webster, set up over 40 years ago in the form of the Sociology of Work program, the SWP. He joked when we celebrated the 40 years last year that he had to take on the acronym SWOP because he didn't want to be associated with the SWP. SWOP became the intellectual home for many over the years, many from different schools of political thought, but who came together in a common that they saw, that they came to, that they made in a home of struggle, a home of knowledge production rooted in struggle, inside and beyond the university, but mostly a struggle over ideas, a struggle rooted in the production of knowledge that also acknowledged the relationship between power and knowledge, acknowledging the power to produce. And central to this was a concept that Eddie made popular and that runs across SWOP's work over generations, that of critical engagement, in which there is a commitment and a defense of the autonomy of the researcher, of the scholar, but at the same time, a critical self-reflexivity on the part of the researcher. It is this that allowed for studies and knowledge produced rooted in struggle to also be open to critique, to be able to acknowledge the limits and blind spots of changes produced in contexts and imaginaries of knowledge production themselves and possibilities for change emerging from different contexts, changing contexts, and to produce anew in and from the interplay between struggle, resistance, and recuperation in time, in history, in time, over time. The name Edward Webster went down in history long before his passing this last week. Many will lay claim to this, but it's a passing we have experienced and spoken about as untimely. Yesterday, Arisita spoke about time being out of joint. Time is out of joint, but it is also in this disjuncture that we can remember, we can relate to Eddie, his mark, his work, his thought, his being out of time, to let him live outside of history and the linear march of time and progress, to draw from his work, from the past, to read it from the present, to open it up to new pasts and to new ideas of the future in the realm of the yet to come, for what might yet to be. And we at SWOP understand this as our collective inheritance, a collective inheritance that is also our debt not just to Eddie, but to pasts that might still come, for futures to come. Thank you.
Thanks to our speakers. We will now have a musical item from the duo you see there preparing. That's Mandla Mulangeni and Yonela Munana. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mandla and Yonela. It is once again an honor to introduce to you the second group of our speakers. We term these colleagues beyond vets, but we know very well that they've got huge links with vets. The first one will be Dr. Bonginkosi Blade Nzimande, our Minister of Higher Education, Science and Technology, followed by Mr. Dinga Sikwebu, a unionist and Global Labor University associate. Third in the group will be Professor Michael Buravoy, Professor of Sociology, University of California, Berkeley. We will, when his opportunity comes, listen to a pre-recorded video. Minister.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Professor Mucha Musemo. Let me also greet Professor Imran Valodia, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of Wits University, colleagues, comrades, and friends. I would like to thank the organizers, in particular Professor Imran Valodia, for inviting me today to share brief thoughts on the extraordinary life and times of the late Professor Edward Webster, or Comrade Eddie, as we often refer to him, many of us. First of all, please allow me to again express my heartfelt condolences at the loss of this giant figure who has had such an enduring influence on left thinking and politics. My thoughts in particular goes to his lifelong partner, Luli Kalinikos, their children, wider family, and his colleagues and comrades. To the family, I want to say, Nilale ngenxeba. I've known Eddie for well over 4 decades, in different historical contexts, places, roles, and coinciding with specific phases in our respective lives. First, I started working closely with Eddie when I served on the board of the South African Labour Bulletin. Carl, you will remind me, because I seem to think it was between 1984 and 1987, because we served together with you. Also, I worked closely with Eddie when I was made president of ASA in 1987, the predecessor to the South African Sociological Association. Also used to enjoy his papers at every annual ASA conference and his insights and contributions. Eddie was also one of my PhD external examiners. And also, people do not know this much, that he was in the selection committee when I applied for a job as professor and head of department in the Department of Sociology at the then UTW. As it happened, I got offered the job, but my senior political comrades dissuaded me from taking us up. And Eddie was amongst the most disappointed in this. The last time we had an intellectual engagement with Eddie was last year at the 50th anniversary of celebrating the 1973 Durban strikes in Durban. Of course, Eddie was from an older generation of left scholars who played a highly influential role in the revitalization of radical democratic discourse and politics from the early 1970s. I think, like many in this audience, I first encountered him via his seminal writings as a labor sociologist, as an undergraduate student at the University of Zululand, then more systematically as an industrial psychology postgraduate student at the University of Natal then. I was employed at that university as an academic and threw myself into Marxist labor studies, a discipline over which Eddie played a formative role. Remember, we even experimented RE Seater's, Professor, he's here. I don't know whether that's still working, by trying to combine industrial psychology and industrial sociology, see if we could develop a new paradigm. And we founded the Center for Industrial and Labor Studies at the then University of Natal, with Eddie in the background. I remember our lively and always collegial encounters at the conferences of ASA, in which Eddie was a beacon of strength. During the intense struggles of the 1980s, leading up to the disintegration of the apartheid system, Eddie was a formidable intellectual stalwart, not only amongst the academic left at university, but also amongst unionists and labor activists of the fledgling progressive labor movement at the time. With the transition to democracy at the end of the 1990s, our professional paths diverged. Eddie remained a solid academic and a labor activist, and I became a public representative. But our political and ideological worldviews shared a lot together, at least on some of the major issues. For reasons of time, I can only really very briefly reflect on 3 areas in which I came to know of his influence and contributions to democracy. These are my own views about Eddie. I'm sure you would love this, that people actually approach any subject from their own perspective. Whether some other people may agree or disagree with my comment about Eddie is neither here nor there. The most important thing is to reflect on this giant and his work. The first relates to his role in the theory and politics of the progressive labor movement in the 1970s, 1980s period. Eddie will be remembered as part of a remarkable group of left intellectuals, including Alec Erwin, Doug Heinsohn, Rick Turner, Charles Smith, and many others who worked together, by the way, with ex-SACTU stalwarts like Judson Kuzwai, who played a significant role in reviving the militant trade union movement in the wake of the 1973 Durban strikes. Rising worker militants in this period marked a significant rupture in the relative political stability enforced by apartheid oppression, especially after the Rivonia trials of the early 1960s. This opened a very important and new front of struggle. It also contributed to new contradictions emerging amongst fractions of capital and within the apartheid state about the tenability of many aspects of the apartheid system, which was increasingly also acting as a fetter to capital accumulation as the economic boom of the 1960s came down crashing. It was a time also new alliances were being forged between the labor movement and some of the progressive student and civic movements. New left literature on the militant trade union, like Work in Progress, the South African Labor Bulletin, amongst others, was largely based on various Marxist critiques of the crisis-ridden apartheid political economy. Eddie and others also weighed in on the so-called at the time registration debate on whether the unions should be registered in the light of the apartheid regime conceding space for them to actually register after the Vihan and Rickett labor union reforms. They argued, I would say correctly, although there was a hell of a debate at the time, that it was indeed important to exploit that space to re-register the progressive trade union movement. Of course, these debates also raised questions that were outside of the union circles but impacting a lot. The question also of the other struggles taking place, the education struggles and civic struggles, as well as it was within this context that there were raging debates over workerism versus populism, political unionism versus syndicalism, and more seriously, the kinds of alliances that needed to be forged. Broadly, that was the first area. Secondly, quickly, the area in which I felt Comrade Eddie's influence was in his enduring and lifelong role as a scholar, and a Marxist sociologist. He pioneered the field of labor studies, Eddie. And I hope that we will build a monument. By a monument, I don't mean a physical structure, but some kind of honor, permanent honor, to Eddie's role in building progressive labor studies in this country. We've already spoken about SWAP, that he actually built, but he participated in so many other things that I wouldn't like to repeat that have also been raised. But I was struck by Eddie's adaptability. In fact, one of the articles I'm about to read, which is in my queue of reading, is his latest work relating to new technologies, platform capitalism, as it is actually being called. It was strange for an 8-year, late 70s, early 80s professor who is beginning to grapple with these things because it's regarded as the site of youth. But that was Eddie, who was actually adaptable and able not just to move with times, but also to move ahead of times in many respects with his vision. I hope that Wits scholars will keep this powerful tradition and also extend radical Marxist scholarship, which I am concerned, by the way, that it's not as vibrant as it used to be in the past. We can't only be having only particular ideological persuasions in universities. Those are not universities. If you're pushing neoliberalism, that's all. That can't be a university, to be quite honest. Left scholarship must have legitimately a place. I've tried in my own little way as a minister to fund initiatives that will make sure that such traditions and other left traditions do not die. The last thing I would just like to say, Chair, is that Eddie also was now writing extensively on the national question. Of course, the issue of the national question was part of the big debates in the 1980s, the relationship between class, race, and gender. And Eddie co-authored with Karen Pampalis a book which actually was looking at the different strands of the national question in our own struggle, especially the recognition of the historical specificity of race and gender as a category of power, but embedded in the social structures of capitalist reproduction. The continued legacies of social inequality facing Black, and particularly Black women African South Africans, some 28 years after our own transition. I do want to say as I end, Eddie has made an enormous contribution and has influenced many of us. Yunus Karim, who some of you know, used to berate me and say, "You have a PhD in sociology, but you didn't do sociology 1. How come?" You know, I'm not joking. I used to say, go and blame 2 people for that, Arisitas and Eddie Webster. Thank you very much.
Program Director. Since Eddie's passing, tributes have been pouring in, and younger generation of sociologists have called Eddie the sociology Madala. In tributes, Eddie has been described as a living ancestor, a term I believed he coined. In the 5 minutes that I've been afforded, I want to declare that Eddie was also a living ancestor of the labor movement. As many people appeal to ancestors to intercede on their behalf, when faced with intractable challenges, the labor movement turned to Eddie Webster. and as a movement, and in return, we received three things. One, advice. Two, caution. And thirdly, generosity. Eddie did not only research and study labor organizations. In his own way, he contributed for more than 5 decades to the building of worker organizations. The two biggest trade union federations, with Eddie's passing, issued public statements saluting Eddie for his role. And interestingly, both federations called him the revolutionary professor. Without going far back, I want to just relate through 3 instances that hopefully will show how the trade union movement regarded Eddie Webster as its living ancestor. In 2005, COSATU affiliates were unable to deal with a chasm that emerged between the federation's top leaders. They felt that mediation was required. And who did they turn to? Eddie Webster. In 2012, after 6 years without a director, the future of the Chris Hani Institute, a think tank that COSATU and the South African Communist Party established in the early 2000s, was not in a good space. And who did the two organizations turn to stabilize the institute? Eddie Webster. Eddie served as the director of the Chris Hani Institute from September 2012 to September 2015. Earlier this week, I went back to some old union documents, and I found an interesting report which read as follows. A prominent academic close to the labor movement stated that COSATU is often good at opening the doors through engagement, but not as good at walking through them. This is now COSATU's report. It continued to say, COSATU has reached a similar conclusion and resolved to address this weakness. As a result of this discussion, the COSATU Central Executive Committee resolved in May 2008 to establish the Walking Through Open Doors project. Now, what do you think is the prominent academic close to the labor movement that the report was referring to? Take a guess. Eddie Webster. Although I came across Eddie Webster's name through the pages of the Labor Bulletin in the early 80s, I first met Eddie in 1985, and it was at the Sociological Association conference in July 1985. Since then, we've interacted, and we even worked together on some projects. Now, with an increased realization of his status as a living ancestor of the labor movement, one was frequently summoned by Eddie, and I was asked to explain developments within the labor movement. More and more, I received calls from Eddie saying, Dinga, I need to talk to you. And these discussions started next to his pool at his home, then shifted to the Radium Beer Hall in Orange Grove, then moved to a coffee shop in Kensington, and lately at Mike's Kitchen in Parktown. And with his notepad, brushing his beard or pulling it, Eddie would interrogate me about this or that development within the trade union movement. And Eddie, without verbally expressing it, had a way to say, cut to the chase. And throughout this interaction, as the labor movement, as I said, we were showered with generosity. Before he initiated the Global Labor University here at Wits, Eddie moved his master's program on industrial and economic sociology to late afternoons so that working people and trade unionists in particular could do the course. And I was fortunate to sit in a class with the Minister of Minerals, Resources and Energy, Comrade Gwede Mantashe, in the same class. And Eddie had to put the rules that this was not a COSATU Congress and a debate between NUMSA and NUM. It would be amiss for me not to tell this gathering that I am a recipient of Eddie's generosity. In 2005, I got into trouble with the union tops in my union, and I was thrown out of my union. When Eddie was satisfied that there was an act of injustice in the action of the union, he offered me a job at SWAP. And I was with SWAP for 3.5 years as I fought for my reinstatement through the courts. I left SWAP after the Labor Court decided that I was unfairly dismissed and I had to be reinstated. For this, and for this, I will forever be indebted to Eddie. With Eddie gone as a living ancestor, the labor movement does not have to embark on rituals to accompany him. As the labor movement, we don't have to embark on rituals to return his spirit. His work, his legacy are with us. His writings are around us. The task is to tend to them. Thank you.
We're now going to watch remarks from Professor Michael Buravoy.
Lulis Ampetakis, as she was then, My Times with Eddie Webster. I first met Eddie Webster in 1968. It was in the playground of King David's School, a Jewish school in the northern suburbs of Johannesburg. Its teachers were known for their dissenting voices. Eddie was a new teacher, and I was staying with another teacher at King David's, Luli Zampatakis, as she was then, now Luli Kalinikos, the famous social historian, author of popular working class histories of South Africa, and renowned biographer of ANC leaders. Eddie and I got to be good friends. I so loved his company, and I thought he loved mine. But I was wrong. He kept on visiting me because I was staying with Luli. It was Luli he was interested in. I was just the excuse. I now like to think that I contributed to their remarkable relationship, lasting nearly 60 years. Eddie, the turbulent windmill, Luli, the quiet voice of reason. A perfect complement. I was lost in South Africa in that year, 1968, and so after 6 months, I left. Eddie dropped me at the Great North Road, from where I hitchhiked to Zambia. I would spend the next 4 years on the Copperbelt and University of Zambia. And over the following 2 decades, I would see Eddie first in the UK and then in the US. And in that way, I kept up with his relations to Rick Turner, his participation in the Durban strikes, his move to Wits, the formation of SWAP, his battles in the university, as well as his immersion in the trenches of the burgeoning union movement. I would not return to South Africa until 1990, when the ANC boycott was lifted. Bladen Zamandi, then a budding sociologist, invited me to address ASA, Association of Sociologists of Southern Africa. That was a fateful visit. South Africa was shifting into transition mode. Mandela had marched into freedom. I went with Eddie and Luli to witness a celebration of the unbanning of the SACP at a mass rally in Soweto, where the underground leaders were unveiled. His articles of the time captured the dilemmas of exit from apartheid, exiting without a plan, as he would say. Though he did have an inordinate faith in the labor movement. It was Eddie who showed me what sociology could be. He inspired me and many others to redefine the meaning of sociology, giving it a political engagement, but without losing its integrity as an academic enterprise. Eddie created and then led SWAP, a major support for the rising South African labor movement, the founding of the South African Labor Bulletin, entering into the Great Registration debate, the training of shop stewards, the monitoring of strikes during the emergency of the 1980s, the launching of SWAP breakfasts, yes, those famous SWAP breakfasts, and so much more. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, Eddie would do something quite unusual, accompany his students to their field sites to become a true partner in their research. Eddie embraced not only his students and his local colleagues, but all comers from all over the world. He showed them the same enthusiasm as he did his own students. Working with Carl von Holt, Andries Bezuidenhout, Sakela Bushlangu, and of course, his devoted and lifelong friend Jackie Koch, as well as his illustrious students such as Sarah Masoetsa. With these and many more, SWAP became a center of engaged research. Through his participation in the International Sociological Association and his founding of the thriving Global Labor Journal, Eddie pioneered the expansion of global labor studies, and indeed was a founding member of GLUE, the Global Labor University, of which we have heard already. In these last few days, tributes to his influence have ricocheted across continents. Eddie had many friends. He had the gift of making everyone feel that they were so very special. I think of him as living out the dilemmas of communism, but in a capitalist world, creating devoted communities around him, demanding that we keep up with him, whether it was his overstimulated mind or his jogging body. His heart beat faster and deeper, until sadly it simply couldn't keep up with him. He was an inveterate and instinctive optimist. His sociology of hope carried us through what often seemed to be hopeless times. He taught us that there is always a way forward. I can't imagine a world without Eddie Webster. He was a permanent fixture. He has now given us an impossible task to fill the void he has left. But Eddie, we promise to try to follow the path you have trodden for so many years. We promise.
Another musical item from our duo. Thank you for that musical tribute, Mandla and Yonela. I now wish to introduce the speakers in the group, in the third group, of colleagues and friends of Eddie. First in the group is Professor Sarah Moswetsa, Chief Executive Officer of the Human Sciences Research Council, a friend and former student of Eddie, followed by Professor Carl van Holt, former director of SWAP, student and friend of Eddie. Last but not least, Professor Jacqueline Koch, SWAP, Sociology, and a friend of Eddie. Prof. Moswetsa.
Good morning, everyone. I thought that I didn't have to say anything after that music. I think it said a lot about what I needed to say and the state of mind. A friend said to me, I hope you will bring boxes of tissues, knowing you. So I'm trying to work very hard. I'm negotiating and I'm having a very critical dialogue with my tears. It is indeed an honor and very difficult standing here. And I have 3 letters, and if you're an Eddie student and you don't know 1, 2, 3, and if you can't say 3 things. So I have 3 letters. But first, let me say this, that I encountered Eddie 27 years ago. I was scared of him. I think to some extent I still am standing here. My teacher, my mentor, my confidant, my father. Someone is winning this discussion. Where I come from, I was born in Soweto, and where I come from, funerals are usually a spectacular. And funerals are times when you discover that your father, if it's a funeral of your father, that your father has kids and has family members. The first letter goes to Luli, Alexia, Kimon, the Kalinikos family and the Webster family. This is hard for you, this is hard for all of us present here and many joining us. But I can only say thank you. Thank you for the love, for all of us, for you shared Eddie with us. Alexia, Kimon, you didn't even consent to sharing Eddie with us. It just happened. I want to thank you very much for that. Letter number 2. We've only been given 5 minutes. I know people are worried about these letters now. Letter number 2. To my father's side of the family. Again, where I come from, father's side of the family is often defined as unsupportive, unloving, backstabbers, and all kinds of things. Not mine, not mine. To Karen and John, to Astrid and Ari, to Michelle and Vish, to Jackie, to Carl and Adele, to many others here that I don't want to mention, for if you were to know my father's family, you'll start going after them, and I don't want that. And maybe I should mention them just by first name. And And I think they also didn't know that they had a family member. Johnny and Charles. And many others I know are present here. If I didn't mention you, just know that you probably belong to my mother's side of the family. I also want to thank all of you, and let me also just thank Michael Buravoy. So let me be specific now, Michael. All of you have made time for Eddie. Eddie made time for all of you. I know that as I spent the many years with him, I know how much he loved you, and I also know how much you loved him. And Michael, I know we joked last year, October 2023, that the many dinners that we had and the last one that we had, we said it was the Last Supper. And it turned out to be indeed the Last Supper with our Eddie. The third letter. I didn't think that I was going to say this, but I arrived at Wits University in 1995, and I think a lecturer from who taught me then in 1995 from Soweto, one of the first lectures in Umthombo building, we called it Social Sciences building then. I know that names come and change, Minister. And he said, look at the person sitting next to you, that person is going to fail sociology. I failed sociology. I then encountered Eddie in 1996. And the story, the real story is yet to be told. I'm standing here because of him. Letter number 3. Dear Eddie, my Eddie, you taught me sociology, you taught me life. We finished a few chapters. We revisited some over and over again. Over the years, you were my teacher of sociology, you were my teacher of life. I was given 5 minutes for this moment. Indeed, Imran, what would Eddie want me to do? We finished many chapters indeed, Eddie. And there are many. It was the chapter on the Molotov cocktail. It was a chapter on the race class debate. My first introduction to Marxism. The chapter on the Manchester Road, the informalization of production. The chapter on the real hidden abode. And you would say, Eddie, the real hidden abode, Sarah, I've discovered. This is your work. It's not the factory. Marx was wrong. Marx was wrong. It's the household, Sarah. Hold on to that. In Yeovil, thanks Adele, in Yeovil, we congregated in a beautiful home. And Eddie, we went through the chapter on the compression of time and space. And how I wish today I could do that and you'd come here, back to me. We had a chapter, you and I, on the upward floating Calabar. And 13 months ago, we revisited this chapter. You taught me, we went through another chapter of international solidarity. Workers of the world unite. More recently, workers, not just workers, the oppressed of the world unite. And it is a story, it is the lived realities of the mothers in Gaza and the kids in Gaza as I stand here, that I know very well that pain, that it is indeed a genocide. that it is indeed the responsibility of all of us to stand with the people of Gaza. Then there was a chapter on praxis, as we will pronounce it. It's praxis of bringing theory and practice. And here, Eddie, you taught me not just theory, not just anything else, but how to build an institution. And more recently, how to rebuild. John once asked me, Eddie, how do you do this National Institute of the Humanities and Social Sciences? At that time, I was very young. I think I was very young. And I know that it is with you, Eddie, that you said it is about service. It was about service to others, not yourself, that matters the most. That it was about the next generation. And I'm very proud that that National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, through your teachings, through your hand-holding, has indeed produced over 540 and counting PhDs in the system. While your peers were chasing ratings and impact factor, and they were pontificating about the world, you worried about the value of a black child, me. You worried about a mine worker, a factory worker, and now recently, an Uber driver. They are still doing that, Eddie. They're still chasing ratings. They're still chasing what they call impact factor. I wonder what they would have done if they had sat down with you and understood what real impact is. And the very people that are claiming impact factors, they lament about the state of our country, and yet they don't do anything about it. When I was challenged in my early years at NIHSS, when I was challenged of disrupting the humanities and social sciences in some institution that will remain nameless, I stand here. Of disrupting the institution. As usual, I called on you. I rushed to your garden. We sat at the corner. When you meet with Eddie and he takes you right at that corner of his garden, know that it is very serious. He sat down with me and he says, I don't know why you're crying. I don't know what the drama is, Sarah. You are indeed disrupting. Own it. Let's move. As my mentor of life, the latest chapters, these ones are not easy chapters for me. You were even firmer in your teaching. You insisted that Zinzile and Pama should learn how to swim, otherwise you'll teach them. When I refused the exact spot where I'm standing here, when I refused to attend my own master's graduation, you said a couple of things, but later, when I was doing my fieldwork in KZN, I refused to do one thing for you. I rebelled. You summoned me to your office. You firmly reminded me of Soweto, of Wits University. I thought you were being unkind. And I remember telling many people that you were unkind. You reminded me of Soweto. You reminded me of my place at Wits University. But I think I didn't say this to many people, that you said to me, I must always finish what I start, not for me, but for generations to come. In a world, and I'm concluding, in a world and institutions that sought to nullify my existence, as a black woman from the township. You, Eddie, you fought, we fought many fights together. And we won, Eddie. But there was one that we didn't win. Sam, you're safe, don't worry. And you said to me, in battle, in war, in fights, there's always something called strategy and tactic, Sarah. Let's retreat for now. For now. Then there was a chapter, Eddie, on love. Who'd have thought? I have seen you love everyone around you for many years. Never have I seen a bigger love in action that I have seen you proudly display, patiently so, to Luli. I watched as a student. I observed, and I was in awe of you again. Finally, there was a chapter on death. I think you would say to me, why theorize when I can teach you practically so, praxis? I continue to learn from you. It's the toughest lesson that you have ever taught me. This is consistent of you. So Eddie, what do I do with all the unfinished chapters? Alexia said, we should continue, we should finish them. We planned, as Michelle said, we plotted, we dismantled, we built. You held my hand firmly so, and when your body was not here, though your body is not here, when your body was here, you did magic. The world will now experience your brilliance, now without the limits of the body, now without the limits of time and space. Let's do it, Eddie. I love you, Aluta.
Yeah, such is the world of Wits. I bring my own stage. Yep. So first of all, I just want to thank the musicians. I mean, I think they played like Eddie would have played if he knew how to play. So, I came to Johannesburg in 1986, and I came to find Eddie. I had heard about this man, and I knew also that his classes were the gateway to the unions. I'd also heard that he was a Menshevik. I kind of couldn't believe it. I sort of thought I was a Bolshevik. Still, I came, and I met him. A union friend of mine introduced us, took me to his place, and I wanted to talk to him about, joining his honors class. And I have to say, that meeting did not go well. It was a bad start. Because I told him who I was. I mean, I'd been involved with unions, with literacy in Cape Town, and I wanted to get into his class, and I wanted to work more closely with unions. And he sort of looked at me skeptically, and he said, "Why don't you study disability?" I mean, we all know that Eddie could be a real boor. And he demonstrated it solidly in that moment. But maybe if I had studied disability, I would have gotten to the stage. Anyway, so it was a bad start to a 40-year relationship that became a 40-year friendship, a 40-year collaboration, actually. So what I did discover the Menshevik, I had to say. But I also discovered a man who had this kind of boundless curiosity to understand the world. It's almost like a feverish curiosity to understand the world. He had a restless intelligence. And the question was, how is the world changing? What is this world now? What is it becoming? What new things, what new possibilities are emerging in the world? What new structures, what new movements, and what new opportunities? What is emerging that we haven't yet recognized, that we haven't yet named? And what kind of future do they point us towards? What new possibilities? And somehow Eddie thought knew, and I think we've heard today that he was right, that by deepening our understanding of now, of this moment, we could, and of what the future might be, simply by that act, by that process, that in a way he would be bringing that future into being. And that was how he approached, his sociology. So his landmark book, Cast in a Racial Mold, is about the changing labor process that allows the new black unionism that became ultimately COSATU and so on. And he was right there, in that moment, finding that moment and working out how do we work in that moment. And his last book, his most recent book, is now, That World Has Disappeared. The digital revolutions have actually changed the world. Now, what are the possibilities that are left for workers? And many sociologists, many industrial sociologists say, the time for organized labor is over. The digital economy is impossible to organize. Eddie never refused that. He never accepted. He refused to accept that. And he went in, did the work, and in fact helped the scooter driver workers, as they told us last night, how do you build a union in these new circumstances? And his book came out of that. So always on that kind of cutting edge. And all of this is to say that Eddie was also a man of ideas. Not ideas for their own sake, but ideas that were necessary and vibrant for understanding the now and making the future. For Eddie, ideas were living things that emerged out of interactions with everyone, out of conversations, out of seminars, out of teaching, out of research, from his own students, from trade unionists and other organizations. He loved ideas. And he often said there's no such thing as an original idea. These ideas emerge out of collective action, collective work, collective discussions. They come from a lot of people. My ideas are not my ideas. They belong to a much greater kind of collective. So with this kind of love of ideas, he loved to convene forums where ideas were discussed. And I want to tell you the story about when I first went back to Swahili, but I do want to say, Blade, I'm one better than you on this one. I got a PhD. I never did first year. I never did second year or third year. I came to Wits with an English degree. So maybe that was why Eddie didn't want to take me. But I persuaded him, and in the end he did, and he allowed me to work on my honors and then my PhD without ever studying undergraduate sociology. So it can be done. Or it could be done if Eddie was your mentor, your patron. The staff meetings, yes, those staff meetings every week on Monday there was the staff meeting. And it was a fantastic occasion. That was a place for ideas. It was a place to talk. And this is with a group, a smallish group, a group including, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 staff, administrators, maybe a student or two. And every Monday, we were to discuss what had come up, what our ideas were, what we were working on, whether it was a paper we were writing or research we were doing, or whether it was some speech that had been reported in the newspaper, something a politician had said, or something, a conversation that one had had on the weekend. And all of these were grist for his mill, and he wanted us to all be intoxicated, actually, with this ongoing kind of striving to understand what is going on now. And of course, those fabulous breakfasts, the swap breakfasts, the famous swap breakfasts that have been mentioned already, which were just another way of having those discussions. And Eddie always presiding over them. But the swap meetings were also marked by the fact that there was always a big flask of coffee. And I think for Eddie, coffee was necessary to ideas. In fact, I almost think that coffee, actually not necessary to ideas, but necessary to a conversation about ideas. And I almost think that for Eddie, coffee was an idea as well, as a speedster that he was. So all of this, his passion for conversation about ideas and for ideas made him an absolutely fabulous, outstanding teacher. Because he was really interested in what his students were doing for their own sake, for the ideas' sake, and for what he could learn from them as well. And he often said that the best teacher is one whose students learn from him and go on to supersede them. And this is what Eddie himself sort of strived for. And so the next part of what I want to talk about is about him and me, and that sort of struggle between us over ideas. And so I'm going to jump a whole lot of time, obviously, but we spent a lot of time together at the Labour Bulletin. I was on the board, I was the editor, he was on the board, and he piloted me through many difficult situations. And I have to say that there, his Menshevism was really, really important. He sort of knew the moment to restrain my impulsive Bolshevik tendencies and try and keep an eye on the long game, the big picture. Actually, I'm going to tell you something else about Eddie. I hadn't planned to. It's banal. But no, it's not banal. It's important. He had another favorite phrase, which was, keep your powder dry. Keep your powder dry for the big battle. That's what I'm doing. You'd be urging him to a confrontation, mostly with the university. And he'd decide to keep his powder dry. And I kept waiting for the big battle. Eddie, when's this big battle? Your powder's going to be wet by the time the big battle comes. What are we waiting for? Then I realized Eddie isn't going for the big battle. He's going for, all the battles that you can win, keeping your powder dry, long picture in sight, keeping the institution going, not letting it die. And that was kind of quite amazing, an amazing quality, but you do still need Bolshevism around. So, then there comes, so I was with him through that, and then my PhD as well. And then comes a time when you have to leave your mentor behind. You work with his ideas, he works with your ideas, you critique his ideas, you have a discussion, you move on. But then comes a time where you've got to plow other fields. You don't carry on plowing the fields of your mentor. You have to go out, and find your own place. And that leaves the mentor often a bit pissed off. And I think that for quite a while, that was when I was at SWAP, Eddie was not entirely happy with what I was doing. Labour had got lower and lower on the agenda. Other things were coming up that I was really interested in. I thought was more cutting edge than where Labour was then, at the time, and still is probably. And then, you know, this is the wonderful thing about Eddie, the wonderful, wonderful thing about him, his quality, is I think it was actually at the ISA, the International Sociological Association, where I was giving a paper or something on violence, was being quoted, my work on violence was being quoted. And he came to me afterwards and he said, I think I can see what you're getting at. When I got back to South Africa, there was an email saying, won't you send me these texts that you've been working on violence? I want to really see what you're getting to grips with. And we had conversations about writing a joint paper, which would have been fantastic, except that we were both rushing too much with other things. But a joint paper bringing back violence and labor and talking about them together. And that didn't happen, unfortunately. But then, you know, what happened to me, and it was just quite an amazing thing, is that I started working. I felt uncomfortable with Michael Burawoy, who was a great friend of Eddie over many, many years. And I became a great friend of mine also through that. And he developed a concept called public sociology, which is now known all over the world. And he always said, I learned this from South Africa and from SWAP and from Eddie, because this is what Eddie was doing. And we in South Africa, I mean, the way he's talking about it doesn't quite make sense to what we do. It's not the same. But this is now the term globally, so this is what we called what we were doing. And I started to get itchy. And I started to think, now, how's a different way of thinking? We can't let this carry on. We're doing stuff that's called public sociology, but it's not public sociology. And I started scratching around, and when I was looking for a way to think differently about it, I returned to an idea that Eddie had put forward it was somewhere in the early to mid-'80s, called critical engagement, to describe his practice. And so I went back and I sort of resurrected that term. I went back to old fields of Eddie that he'd long left fallow and moved on to. Eddie was like that. He moved, you know, he moved into new things all the time. I found his old, you know, old articles and papers he'd written. And it was quite extraordinary because it was like firstly encountering the richness of his thoughts, but they were thoughts almost that they were like sparks coming out of the moment, coming out and moving on, and then another way of thinking about it, another way of thinking about it, and that was critical engagement. And I used that. Ultimately, that actually became the basis for a book with two other colleagues of mine critiquing Michael's use of public sociology. But I really felt strongly, deeply, that through that, I was rediscovering a young Eddie Webster that I had never met, and paying tribute to this great man and this great teacher, and someone who had in many ways been, as Sarah said, like a father to me. My last meeting with him was 3 weeks before he died. He came to Cape Town. He had a paper he wanted to talk about, which was on Michael and his how he had been influenced by South African sociology. So we had a wonderful morning over coffee, discussing ideas and discussing both of our pasts, our work with Michael and Michael's work back in the US. And that was the last time I saw him. It was a wonderful final memory to have, you know, of Eddie. Thanks.
It's great to see so many people here today. I like to think that this is a celebration. It's a celebration of what I can only describe as a miracle. And the miracle is that Eddie lived for as long as he did. The miracle is that If the apartheid regime had realized how dangerous he was, he would have been banned or house arrested or even assassinated, as David Webster, Rick Turner, and Ruth First were. And some of you will remember Eddie's speeches on 2 of those occasions. So the question arises, what did Eddie do that was so dangerous? He was an architect as well as a builder. He conceptualized and built spaces of agency, meaning the ability of people to make choices, to act independently, to realize that phenomena like racism and poverty are not natural and inevitable, but can be changed. People's ability to question the existing social order and to act for a different world. The spaces or institutions that Eddie built or strengthened, SWAP, the Sociology Department, especially labor, industrial labor studies, the Global Labor University, all of these produced individuals who became agents of deep, radical, and transformative change. So the next question is, how did Eddie achieve this? He was the most generous and energetic person I have ever known. And by generosity, I'm not thinking of money. I'm thinking of how he used his time, his ideas, and his voice. His life was never about self-promotion or individual advancement. He lived by a different ethic, an ethic of sharing and solidarity, of collaborating, of working collectively. He was extremely modest about his own many publications. He liked to say, quote, "If you think you have an original idea, you have lost your memory." Eddie loved people. He believed in people. He found them interesting. He listened to them. And I could tell when he was really listening because he used to tug at his hair, his forelock in Shakespearean English. He only stopped doing so when he realized he was developing a bald patch. Eddie appreciated people, he appreciated their strengths, and he recognized their weaknesses without always judging. He believed everyone had the capacity to acknowledge their mistakes, to make rational decisions, and even to be kind. Now, Eddie was not born with these qualities. He developed them in the course of a 52-year partnership with an extraordinary woman who had a powerful influence over him and a tremendous and moving source of strength. Luli Kalinikos is the kindest person I know, the most caring, gentle, and optimistic. She is famous for her writing. Golden Workers has become a classic, as have her biography of Oliver Tambo and The World Mandela Made. Eddie believed in our collective capacity for change, our ability to create another world, to redistribute power and resources, and to challenge the savage inequalities and injustices of our present. We could call it love, we could call it faith or optimism. It doesn't really matter. What Eddie did was to give us a new political imaginary, and he lived it. He lived it on a daily basis. And it was a life based on his sense of sharing, the importance of sharing, and of solidarity with the oppressed and the excluded. This is what we all have to struggle for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the three speakers. Yet another musical item from Mandla and Ionela. Thank you. Thank you once again, Mandla and Ionela. Last but not least, in Group 4, I would like to invite Kimon Webster to represent the family in your tribute. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's amazing to see all the friends of my father here today. And it's a great honor to share this legacy. I'm not known for my speeches, but I wrote something down for the occasion. Eddie reminds me a bit of Tolkien's famous character, Bilbo Baggins. He made a lot of money on his travels and adventures across Middle-earth, till one day, in the middle of a speech at the gathered party, he just disappeared. And it's interesting that, though he never had a ring of his own, claiming it was just an excuse to exploit the mine workers, he made a special effort to ensure he did get one for my mother. But he lived his life of his own accord, and he didn't feel the need for justification or praise. Indeed, it was not something he would often discuss with me. All the stories that came out over the past week amazed me with the amount of thankless tasks he performed and the small acts of generosity that he did without expecting anything in return. It is to me the greatness of the man that he endured the difficulties of raising a family and excelled in nurturing us to the point where he had done enough. He had run his course and played his part to ensure the future of his children. He went that extra mile. Even if he started slowly, he went out with a bang. He was a person who lived life to the full, never one to do nothing, always writing and, importantly, going out and meeting people. I remember one time in 1988, he decided he would take me to Zimbabwe to attend a party of an ex-Zimbabwean, now rich Australian mining industry guy. You see, a few months earlier, he had insisted I make the trip to Harare myself to visit my friend Dennis Tapfuma and record the LP Central Point with our new record label, Future Alliance Records. It was a real experience, playing drums with the greatest band that never was, who were all farm workers. But the truth was, he had to take me to the bus terminal and put me on the bus to get me there. I just didn't want to go, but he was the one that made me do it. But this time, we went together. We traveled up to the Zimbabwe border, exchanging money at the local shop, and then crossing through. We stayed the night at a lodge close to Great Zimbabwe, where we visited the ancient ruins. And I remember the unique grass that grows on those sacred hills. Very different from your ordinary cuckoo grass. I remember thinking, one wonders if there'll ever be a place for foreigners in this land. We arrived at the party and met with the white farmers, who told me they were planning to move their farms to Zambia and Mozambique, where they felt welcome. Never a thought of going back to Europe or Australia was on the cards. The next morning, we set off early, but not before bumping into Ian Smith, who my dad recognized instantly. We traveled straight through to Joburg and got there after dark. It was a very interesting journey, and it says something about the man, that he was willing to take that extra step, to make that journey, to find out for himself what the world was like. He never intended to slow down. There was always priority made for traveling. Off to Germany next week, and then the UK and Greece for the summer. His car was always kept in tip-top condition. It had scratches and bumps, but the engine was a finely tuned instrument, perfectly constructed to get from A to B. It wasn't a Merc or a BM, but it was ready for the journey. These things are important to him, and I'll never forget that. His life was his own, and he made it special. Dad, I'm going to miss you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eddie's grandson, Marcus. I'm filling in for Alexia. She's at home with my grandmother. I'm going to read a short piece of writing by her and then a poem. It's very nerve-wracking to be up here, but as Alexia would say, Eddie loves a good speech, especially when it's coming from his family members. So, yeah. So this is by Alexia. All through my childhood, I would wake up in the morning to the sound of my parents in the next room discussing the news, the papers just delivered. With excitement, coming up with theories, making plans. They were each other's closest, most trusted advisors, and inspired, encouraged, and pushed each other throughout their lives together. They fundamentally shaped, changed, influenced, and balanced each other. Eddie, a whirlwind of energy and optimism and drive, and Luli, calm, wise, and light. They shared through their 52 years together many large and small triumphs and tragedies. They journeyed through an odyssey, the greatest love story that made me. For many years, at every big family event, weddings, birthdays, my father would read this poem by C.P. Cavafy called Ithaca, the island my mother's ancestors are from, and the home that Odysseus was trying to return to for 20 years. So it seems only appropriate to read it here in honor of this great love and his Ithaca. As you set out for Ithaca, hope your road is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery, Lastrygonians, Cyclops, angry Poseidon, don't be afraid of them. You'll never find things like that on your way. As long as you keep your thoughts raised high, as long as a rare excitement stirs your spirit and your body. Lastrygonians, Cyclops, wild Poseidon, you won't encounter them unless you bring them alongside inside your soul. Unless your soul sets them up in front of you. Hope your road is a long one. May there be many summer mornings when, with what pleasure, what joy, you enter harbors you're seeing for the first time. May you stop at Phoenician trading stations to buy fine things, mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, sensual perfume of every kind, as many sensual perfumes as you can. And may you visit many Egyptian cities to learn and go on learning from their scholars. Keep Ithaca always in your mind. Arriving there is what you're destined for. But don't hurry the journey at all. Better if it lasts for years, so you're old by the time you reach the island. Wealthy with all you've gained on the way, not expecting Ithaca to make you rich. Ithaca gave you the marvelous journey. Without her, you wouldn't have set out. She has nothing left to give you now. And if you find her poor, Ithaca won't have fooled you. Wise as you will have become, so full of experience, you have understood by then what these Ithacas mean. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, the Webster family. Just before we close, I just want to say this. Thank you to all the speakers for your wonderful tributes to Eddie Webster. Thank you to all the organizers. And here I would like to particularly mention Tembelihle Dlamini, whom I'm sure you saw coming up to the stage, whispering in my ears. Let me tell you, that whisper was an instruction. She has so much zeal, energy in whatever she does. And today, she demonstrated that. So thank you so much, Tembi, for all that you've done. I also want to thank Jonathan Tim from the side of the family for all your assistance, and to everyone present, both here and online. Thank you to Mandla and Yonelav for those beautiful musical renditions. Thank you to the Webster family, and thank you, Professor Webster, for everything you've given us. May you rest in peace, knowing that your legacy will live on in the hearts, minds, and deeds of posterity. Thank you very much. Before we go, I have only two reminders to please, as you walk out, consider signing the condolences book as you go out that way, the middle door, I think. I also want to encourage you to donate to the A.D. Webster Memorial Fund, and the information such as this, you will see it as you also walk out of the door. Thank you very much. I wish you safe travels back to your homes. Thank you.